All right. Hello, everyone. We have about 20 media outlets on the line. Thanks very much for joining. I'll just get started with a little bit of housekeeping. Welcome to this media briefing, during which we will launch 2 reports. My name is Keisha Rukikaire. I'm the head of news and media for the UN Environment Program. The 2 reports we're launching today are one by UNEP, which is Used Vehicles and the Environment, a global overview of used light-duty vehicles, flow, scale, and regulation. And the second is also a brand new report by the Netherlands Human Environment Transport Inspectorate in the Ministry for Environment. And it's called Used Vehicles Exported to Africa. This is a fairly high-level panel. Our speakers today are going to be Inge Anderson, who is the Executive Director of the UN Environment Program, Professor Kwabena Frimpong Boateng, Minister of Environment for Ghana, and Ms. Sientje van Veldhoven. Sorry, my pronunciation is terrible. And our moderator today will be one of the authors of the UNEP report, Jane Akumu, who is from our Sustainable Mobility Unit. Just before we get to the subject matter and start the briefing, I'll go into a little housekeeping. We will be listening to some presentations, first by Jane Akumu, who will present the findings of the UNEP report. And Jane will continue then and introduce the next speaker, who will be Inge Anderson, followed by Professor Kwabena Frimpong Boateng, followed by Minister Sientje van Veldhoven. And following these presentations, which will each last about three minutes, we will move on to a Q&A session, which will be moderated by Jane. Now, there's a Q&A box in the Zoom chat. Please submit your questions in that box, listing your name and your media house and organization, so that we can sort of begin to collect them even before the actual session begins. The session is recorded. We will be providing a recording of this session. If you'd like one, please get in touch, and we'll have experts available for you to speak to after this session. With that said, I'd like to invite Jane to start the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Keisha. I have a few slides to share, just to give the background of the used vehicles, why it's important for us as UNEP. I'll share my screen. So why is the issue of used vehicles important, especially when today we will be talking about the light duty vehicle fleet, because this is what we've looked at. So according to the International Energy Agency, we have about 1.1 billion light duty vehicles today, and this is expected to double by 2050. Most of this growth, vehicle growth, will actually take place in developing and transitional countries. And even as these countries pursue other sustainable transport solutions like public transport, walking and cycling, we'll still expect to see a very high growth rate of vehicles, because they're still at very low levels of motorization. So where will these additional 1 billion vehicles be coming from? Where will they be going? And what is the quality? And that is the objective of today's media briefing. So we know that roughly a big percentage or proportion of vehicle fleets, additional vehicle fleets in most of the developing countries are actually used. For example, a country like Malawi, 97% of their additional vehicle fleet are actually used. And that is the same story in most of the African, Latin American countries that allow import of used vehicles. UNEP is part of global programs that have been promoting no and low emission vehicles. And one of the challenges that we found is that there's very little information on used vehicles. What is the quality? What are the quantities? So hence the UNEP report that looked at the 3 important markets, Europe, Japan, and the US. We looked at exports of vehicles from these markets from 2015 to 2018. And what we found is that 70% of these used vehicles are actually heading to developing countries. We also looked at the regulatory regimes of these used vehicles in the importing countries. And what we found, and as you can see from the map, the red and the orange, most of the countries, 2/3 of the countries actually have very weak or weak regulatory regimes. What this means is that these countries could allow the import of very old, pollutive, and inefficient vehicles. And as the Netherlands report will, the presentation by the Honorable Minister will show, this is the case. So this is the last slide. This slide just shows the, which countries have vehicle emission standards. And from the study that we undertook, we found that from the 156 countries that we looked at, 100 do not have any vehicle emission standards. This means that business as usual, we expect to see pollution increasing. We expect to see, not just from a local perspective, but also global perspective, road safety issues or challenges, and other sustainable development issues, hence the need for regulations. And so that's my last slide, just to introduce the issue of used vehicles and why it's important. And without further ado, I would wish to welcome Ms. Inga Anderson to make a presentation on the UNEP report and some of the recommendations from the report. Welcome, Ms. Inga.
Thank you, and I will invite you to stop screen sharing at this time. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you, honorable ministers. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and thank you very much for your leadership in making a move on a more sustainable used vehicle, a greater understanding of the used vehicle market and greater regulatory settings. Let me first say that the global vehicle fleet is set to double by 2050, with 90% of the growth happening in non-OECD countries. In many developing countries, this growth will be fueled by imported used vehicles, as we saw from the presentation. But the current way the used vehicle market operates means that developing countries, particularly in Africa, serve as, I will say, the dumping ground for cars that are no longer considered safe enough or clean enough for developed countries. This is an issue of fairness, of respect, and of equity, and also, of course, a major concern for health, both human and environmental. So continuing this practice will mean more pollution, air pollution, which, as we already know, air pollution causes about 7 million premature deaths each year. And that air pollution will continue to rise while hindering the efforts of importing countries to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and exposing them to road safety issues. As the 2019 UNEP emissions gap report revealed, we need to cut our emissions by 7.6% year on year until 2030 to begin to reach towards achieving the Paris Agreement and the goal of 1.5 degrees. Any temporary slowdown in emissions due to the global pandemic, while much heralded, does not significantly change this picture. We need systemic change, and the global trade in used vehicles is an essential part of the policy mix. We must work with exporters and importers, both government and private, to agree a minimum set of standards for used vehicles. UNEP's proposal, outlined in the new Used Vehicles and Environment report that we're launching today, is that vehicles should meet at least Euro 4 standard, which limits the amounts of pollutants a vehicle can put out, or an equivalent emission standard. These vehicles should be roadworthy before export. Countries should consider setting age limits. UNEP has launched a global initiative to support the introduction of such used vehicle regulations, with much appreciated support from the Netherlands and from the UN Safety Fund, for which we are most grateful. We hope to see strong progress on these standards in the next 2 or 3 years. Already, we've seen some first successes, and we will hear about that now. Ghana has led the push to introduce new vehicle standards in the West African Economic Commission countries, 15 countries, also referred to as ECOWAS, whilst the Netherlands is planning to address the issue both nationally and at EU level. Introducing these standards will cut greenhouse gas emissions, air pollution, road accidents, and running costs in developing countries. Developed countries will also benefit as recycling old, unsafe vehicles rather than exporting them overseas will create extra jobs in the recycling industry and provide extra raw materials in a circular economy. All of this adds up to saving lives and fighting the three planetary crises of climate change, nature loss, and pollution. So with that, I thank you and hand it back over to you, Keisha.
Thank you, Inga, for those remarks and on the report. So we will next move to the Ghana Minister of Environment to give us an example of an importing country. What are the challenges and what are some of the solutions that Ghana is actually implementing as a country and as a sub-region to incentivize the import of cleaner used vehicles? Welcome, Professor Boateng.
Thank you very much, Jane. And let me first of all greet my colleagues, the Minister for Environment of the Netherlands, Van Verpoven, certainly Inga Anderson. Ghana's vehicle population stood at 2.5 million in 2019. And out of this, almost 34% is registered in Greater Accra alone, one region out of the 16 regions. And in 2018, Ghana imported 80,000 used light-duty vehicles. And this is about 5% of all imports from Africa. Our main concerns with regard to used vehicles are air pollution, certainly emission of greenhouse gases, and then the poor quality of used vehicles on our roads, certainly safety. Certainly there's also the element of high fuel consumption, and then the high cost of operating these vehicles. As you can imagine, most operators of used vehicles tend to patronize used spare parts and used tires, and this is compounding the problem. In the past, Ghana used fiscal instruments to regulate the importation of used vehicles. And this included age-based taxation, where there is penalty on cost, insurance, and freight of overage vehicles. This was based on the Ghana Revenue Authority Customs Division Law Act 634 of 2012. There's also a progressive excise tax based on CO2 emissions or the size or the capacity of the engine. We also had exemptions for specific vehicles such as hybrid, electric, and electric vehicles. But the thing is that the law allowed any used vehicles to Ghana, provided the owner pay taxes, the relevant penalties. That is why in 2020, we have amended the law and a new law has been passed. This means that the state provides incentives for automotive manufacturers and assemblers who are registered under the Ghana Automotive Manufacturing Development Program. Also, the law prohibits the importation of salvage motor vehicles comprising wrecked, destroyed, or physically damaged vehicles either by collision, fire, water, or other occurrences, as well as specified motor vehicles about 10 years of age into the country. We are also increasing import duty on specific motor vehicles. And at the same time, we provide exemptions for security agencies and officers who are on various assignments outside the country. I must say that in Accra, the current roadside particulate matter is higher than that of residential, industrial, and commercial areas. The PM 2.5 standard level is about 35 micrograms per cubic meter. But there is also the observation that PM25 concentrations are decreasing comparing 2017 to 2018 and 2019 values. In 2019, the value was 106, now it's about 45. And this gradual reduction is due to certain actions, interventions that we have taken. And I'll end my presentation by mentioning a few of these things. The implementation of policy consideration on cleaner, bus standard, and sustainable public transport in Accra. This was done in 2017. We have adopted fuel economy or efficiency and CO2 emission standards for light-duty vehicles. This was adopted in 2017. For example, fuel economy for diesel and petrol vehicles in Ghana are 7 liters per 100 kilometers for diesel and 7.3 liters per 100 kilometers for petrol. We are also implementing our electric mobility policy adopted in 2018. We are also implementing air quality management plan and communication plan for Greater Accra. This was done, has been going on since 2018. We are also publishing the motor vehicle emission standard for 2019 based on Euro 2 specification. This is supposed to be tightened every 2 years. Finally, we are published and implementing fuel quality standard and policy. This is designed to reduce the sulfur levels in fuel to 50 parts per million maximum. This has been going on since 2017. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Professor Boateng, for that intervention. It's clear that we need several policies, not just one policy, to be able to incentivize the import of cleaner and more efficient vehicles. We will then now move. I would like to also welcome, please, the journalists. If you have any questions, you can post them in the Q&A box, as Keisha already mentioned. And then we will discuss these questions at the end of the panel presentations. So I'd like to welcome now Ms. Stintje van Wolter-Ven, who's the Minister of Environment of the Netherlands, who will present from an exporter's perspective. What are the findings? They will also be launching their report today on a study that they carried out on export of vehicles through their ports. Thank you, Honorable Minister. Welcome. That's fine.
It's okay,
That's
yes.
fine. Yes.
I'm going to say for the third time then, but you didn't hear the first 2 times. Thank you very much, Jay. And I remarked the banner on the back of your office saying, let's beat pollution. And that is indeed a great a challenge that we have jointly. Inger Andersen, very good to see you again. Always a pleasure to work with you on many of these issues. And Professor Kwabena from Boateng, I was impressed by all the initiatives that you are undertaking. I think this is really one of those topics where we can join forces to beat pollution, and I strongly support the efforts by the ECOWAS member states to regulate the import of used vehicles. This will have really significant impact on CO2 emissions, air quality, and road safety. And I think, Jamie, in the slides that you just showed us, you can literally see the correlation between countries with no import regulation and the export of really old and polluting cars. So the good news is regulation works. So I also really welcome the efforts by the UN Environment in this regard, and the Netherlands has supported these efforts as a long-standing member of the Global Partnership for Clean Fuels and Vehicles. I think for importing as well as exporting countries to set new quality standards, detailed information on the current quality of used export vehicles is really imperative. And that is why the Dutch Environment and Transport Inspectorate conducted a thorough study on the quality of used vehicles exported to African countries from the Netherlands. And if we look at the results of that study, you can see that the EU exports over 1 million vehicles annually to African countries, of which about 3% are exported through the Netherlands. And the inspectors concluded that many of these vehicles are comparable to those which we consider end-of-life vehicles in Europe. And these are vehicles, these are old vehicles below Euro 4 emission standards, and often do not have a valid periodic roadworthiness certificate. Some also fail tests for emission requirements. And I think that these results show that urgent action needs to be taken to improve the quality of used vehicles exported from Europe. And as a first step, I will explore the option to classify used vehicles to make clear what is waste and what can still be used. This to be able to prevent the export of waste. And as you can understand, with 3%, it is an issue that the Netherlands cannot address or solve alone. So we need to cooperate. So I will call for a coordinated European approach and also close cooperation between European and African governments to ensure that the EU only exports vehicles that are fit for purpose. But for that, of course, strict regulation in African countries is also really necessary. We can only close this gap if we work on both sides of the trade. In addition, I will also bring this to the attention of the Transport Decarbonization Alliance, which I'm currently chairing, where countries, cities and companies work together to realize a zero-emission transport sector well before 2050. So with that, I hope I've given you a bit of introduction on how important I think it is that we cooperate on this issue and what the Netherlands intends to do with the results that we just received. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. That was quite a good introduction and already reinforces what has been already mentioned by Inga and also the Minister from Ghana. The need for coordination, it's not just an issue of importing or exporting countries. I think the need to work together has come out quite clearly. Are there any questions? I think now we can move to the Q&A session.
Yes, it's a rather quiet crowd at the moment, but we have some questions we received in advance. The first one of these is from Samuel, who is a freelancer in Uganda, and it's a question for the ministers and Inga and Jane. And it says, won't the new ECOWAS measures make vehicles unaffordable for citizens of the region? And it's a double-ended question. And the second part of the question says, are you calling for a complete ban on the sale of used vehicles? If not, can you explain the action you're calling for? Perhaps we can start with Inga.
With pleasure, but of course we should hear from the Honourable Minister, especially from Ghana, since it's directed. But certainly, no, we're not calling for a complete ban. We think that there is still a market here, just there as there is in the developed countries, for used vehicles. This is a choice of affordability and so on. But just like it is regulated in Europe, it should be regulated in other countries. And so that is what we are calling for. And if we do follow through on the kind of moves that we are already now seeing ECOWAS is taking, well, that will mean that both in the exporting country and in the importing country, some regulatory settings have to be put in place. As we heard from Minister van Veldhoven and we heard from Professor Kwabena Boateng. Both ministers are speaking to the frameworks that are needed to be put in place. And frankly, scrap vehicles belong to be scrapped and recycled and repurposed and not in a market where they pose danger, environmental hazards, as well as road hazards. So that's a thing. And taking that vehicle, the ready to not roadworthy out of circulation would indeed be a very, very good thing. In addition, we are concerned that some of the safety features that exist in some of these vehicles that are exporting is removed. Filters and other elements by the time they arrive in the importing country. And that clearly is also a highly difficult and causes both safety issues as well as environmental issues. But let me hand it over to the ministers who both work in this field. And I would suggest that we go to Ghana first, followed by Minister Stenji van Veldhoven. Over to you.
Thank you very much. This is a very important question and a little bit difficult to answer in our environment, especially when you're going for elections. In a little month's time. Yes, we are against the importation of salvaged vehicles. I mean, vehicles that have been damaged by fire, accident, pollution, and other things. And those vehicles that are over 20 years, 10 years and over. But certainly, one cannot ban importation of all vehicles, because there are certain vehicles, special vehicles that can be imported, used into the country. But then, as Inya said, their condition must be such that it will not pose any hazard to the environment and to the health of people. And also, I mentioned earlier on that people who use used vehicles tend to use buy spare parts that are also used, and they may not buy brand new vehicle tires. And so, if we're able to, you need to have a conversation with them that although the vehicle might be old, if you need a spare parts, buy approved new spare parts, use new tires, so as to reduce the accidents on the road. So this is what I will say for now. We have adopted a new automobile policy, and we are encouraging Ghanaians to buy new vehicles. I mean, because in the long run, it will be beneficial to the buyer, to the environment, to our health as well. Thank you.
If you'd like to have my response to this, I would, well, very simply say scrap is crap. And Europe should not be exporting waste to Africa, especially if we see that mobility growth in Africa is going to be large. Then we need to make sure that it's safe. So vehicles that are unsafe should not be exported. And if they are unsafe for road mobility, if they are really unsafe for the environment, they should not be exported. If they're really scrap cars, they should be scrapped. And I think it is crucial that we find ways, and that Africa finds ways to ensure that there's growth in mobility, which is crucial, and which will take place and should take place because everybody needs mobility, that we ensure that this also takes place in a safe way. And I think we can, by joining forces, create a valuable contribution to this.
Maybe Keisha, if I may just also join in.
Please do, Jane.
Okay, thank you. On the issue of affordability of the vehicles, what we found is that countries that have been able to introduce some minimum regulations, for example, Cote d'Ivoire, Mauritius, they've been able to attract very clean vehicles, and the vehicle growth has still continued. So it is important, I think, to have in place some regulations, because it doesn't mean that vehicles will not be affordable. That's what we've seen from some country experiences. And on the second issue of complete bans, what we also see is that some of the countries that have banned used vehicle imports, for example, South Africa, they have lower vehicle emission standards. They have Euro 2 vehicle emission standards. However, some of the countries that have not banned used vehicles are able to import higher technology vehicles. For example, Egypt, they had banned used vehicles, but they allowed the import of used electric vehicles that are up to 3 years. So they're able to take advantage of the ongoing technological changes and attract this kind of vehicles. Thank you. Over to you, Keisha.
Thanks very much, Jane. The next question we have is from Jan Hennep from the AFP in The Hague. And his question is, we have known for years that substandard cars are being exported to Africa and elsewhere. Why has it taken so long for these reports to come out, and why have they been done now? So I suppose this is a question for Jane, the author of the Africa report, of the UNEP report, and Minister van Veldhoven for the Dutch report.
Thank you, Keisha. Yes, we have known that this is an issue for a long time. And UNEP and partners, we've been partnering with countries to look at the kind of vehicles, the kind of fuels being imported into these countries through various programs. The Honorable Minister of Ghana made, some of the interventions, and some of those interventions actually have been through collaboration with UNEP. So we have been working on this, but there wasn't a study that looked at comprehensively the global picture. So this was the reason why we did the study, and thank you to the Netherlands for collaborating and reinforcing, building upon this study. So it is something that UNEP has really been working on for several years.
Yes, I can only add to that. I'd say, of course, we have been supporting the efforts at the international level for quite some time as a long-standing supporter of the Global Partnership for Clean Fuels and Vehicles. And I think the current call for action also is the result of new ECOWAS standards and new information about the quality of exported vehicles. So the study that I just mentioned has the Dutch Environment and Transport Inspectorate has conducted research for nearly 2 years. And this kind of information is, of course, needed to determine what measures can then be taken. So now that we have the information, the next step is to look into the measures that we can take, because it's very clear that Europe should not export its environmental problems to Africa. What is also clear is that the Netherlands cannot do this alone. So I will explore possible criteria at the national level, but we really need a coordinated action at the European level for a truly effective approach. And of course, I will also ensure that I talk to the Brussels colleagues about this, because jointly we can really make a difference here.
Thanks very much. And the next question is again for you, Minister van Veldhoven. This is from Matt McGrath at the BBC, who wants to ask, what type of action at the EU level is needed to tackle this? Taxes, fines, what type of enforcement is required?
Well, I think already harmonized criteria across the EU are needed to prevent export of substandard vehicles. And I think as part of the new Circular Economy Action Plan, the Commission is planning to revise legislation on end-of-life vehicles and international transport of waste. So I will call on for European standards related to the export of used vehicles to be taken up in these revisions. I think that would be a very effective way of tackling this.
Awesome, thank you so much. Well, at the moment, we have no additional questions. So I think I'm going to hand it over to you, Jane, to sort of wrap up the session.
Thank you. I would like to thank all the presenters, the distinguished presenters, starting with Inga Anderson, who's our Executive Director at UNEP, the Minister for Ghana, Kwabena Frimpong Boateng, for your time and for your insights on what Ghana is doing to actually address used vehicles. And we know that as a sub-region, as our executive directors talked about, ECOWAS from beginning of next year, January next year, will be implementing Euro 4 equivalent vehicle emission standards. So this is a big progress for all the 15 countries. We also working with the East Africa community to do a similar thing. We'd also like to thank the minister from the Netherlands for your intervention, for the report that collaborates and gives us the needed evidence to be able to collaborate and to be able to actually see what the quality of these used vehicles and the urgency for us to work on this issue. So as already recommended by the executive director, there's need for a harmonized approach, bringing, from the importer side, from the exporter side. So both the importers need to look at the kind of specifications and vehicles that are coming into their place and introducing, like ECOWAS, harmonized standards, and also from an exporter side. Our executive director spoke about the UN Road Safety Trust Fund. This is the first attempt also to bring a global agreement on used vehicles. So this is quite a commendable thing, and we will be working with several partners, the UNECE, CETA, which is the Global Vehicle Inspection Agency, to look at the issue. Also, what came out is the need for physical or regulatory regimes as well to support this kind of work. The need to look at the used vehicles, not just from a local perspective, air quality, the The executive director spoke about, 7 million deaths, half of which are coming from outdoor emissions, mainly from vehicles. So the need to look at the impacts of this. And I know one of the things that has come out when we are working with the countries is the need to link it better to air pollution and to the global targets and agreements. I think we have a lot to on our plates now, and a good way forward for collaboration and to be able to move forward. So I'd like to thank all the presenters for your time, the media for the time as well to link in to this event. And if you have any further questions, you have, I think the media press had Keisha's contacts. You could also get our contacts if you have any follow-up questions. We are there, we're available. And thank you for joining this event. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much to the two honorable ministers for their leadership on this. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.